Hi everybody. Today we are going to talk about building a very simple one-page, we'll say microsite. Last time we talked about just kind of reminding ourselves about paragraphs, tags, H tags, what are the different types of divs, and just kind of how to start a site, things like that. So we're going to use kind of all of that stuff that we learned last time, and we're actually going to put it into application. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to grab a couple of things that we need to do this exercise with. I suggest that you watch this video and take notes, and then try to do it yourself along with your notes to do this exercise. If that doesn't work for you, you can also just watch the video, get to a certain place, pause it, and then do that part of the exercise, and then go back to the video. So whatever works for you. But I think you'll remember it a little bit better if you try to take notes and then do it on your own, as opposed to trying to do it along with the video. But again, whatever works for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a couple things we need. So in the resources section, we're going to go to our starter HTML folder. We're going to grab that, and we're going to grab our HTML5 template RWD. We're going to grab a copy of that if you don't have it on your desktop from the last video. So we're going to grab that, and I'm just going to put that on my desktop for myself right now. We're also going to grab a zip called toggle menu a little bit later in the exercise. If you want to grab that now, you can go ahead and grab it now. Otherwise, I'll just take us back to here when we get to that portion of it. Also, in the resources search section, in our exercises and videos folder, in the folder that you got this video from, O2 Simple Site Review, we're going to grab files.zip, and that's going to be kind of our files that we're going to be working with, and I'm just going to put that on the desktop as well. So we're going to grab those. So grab your HTML5 templates, that's our starter kit, and our files.zip. That's going to have a bunch of pings that we and JPEGs that we need to make this little site. So I'm going to show you real quick what the site looks like. So I'm going to grab here, I'm going to open up files.zip. I can throw that away. And I'm going to open up meowfest2017.ai. I believe I already have it open down here. So we can kind of take a look at our site. This is a little different. If you've done this one before in another class, this is a little updated version of it. It's still not a super complex website, but there's a few other little itty bitty things in there that are kind of common that a lot of people want to do, like this header and the drop down navigation and the like a subscribe, putting words and photos together, things like that. The other thing that you're going to notice about this site is that it is a phone site. We're going to start coding for phone first in a responsive website. And the reason why you don't start with a desktop size and then make your changes for phone, you make your phone size and then you make your changes for desktop, is that the CSS changes you need to make to go from phone to desktop generally are a lot fewer than to go the other way around. It's a lot easier to go from a simpler layout from coding standpoint, a simpler layout, to a more complex layout from a coding standpoint. Now I'm going to have you design the reverse, because I find it's easier to design desktop and then go to phone, but it's a lot easier to code for phone before going to desktop. So you'll notice a couple things in my Illustrator file. I've got this thing set up at 640 pixels wide. That's about the average size phone. There are some phones that are getting bigger, 770, 800, 830. Some of those Android phones are getting a lot bigger. But I find that the 640 wide is a good starter. I've also got it way tall, like 3,000 pixels tall, because I know that there's a lot of stuff that I may not be able to kind of fit in like my 640 by 1136 tall phone. I might need to scroll, and that's perfectly fine. So I always set my file up a little taller than I need to, just so I have that wiggle room. But we'll go over how to set up files in another video. You'll also notice that I have guides and units here. So I've got a good way of creating this grid. It's a 4-column grid. And again, when we go over in another video about setting up stuff, setting up your files, I'll go over how to make a grid like this. All right. You'll also notice I have a layer called drop down. That's for our drop down menu that we're going to have, that we're going to toggle on and off for this website as well. And then I've got everything else that's my website is in my home my home. So I'm going to use my Illustrator file to kind of give me my pattern of what I'm supposed to create, and also to make measurements from. And I'll talk about how to make measurements. And in the resources folder, you opened up your files, you got a resources folder. This has all of the little images that you need. The X, the hamburger menu, the envelope, the logo, and the lolcat that you need, and everything like that. You notice that most of my images are pings, and that's because they need to have some transparency to see through. My lolcat is a JPEG because it has no transparency, and JPEGs are a lot smaller than pings in general at large sizes. So JPEGs preferable on most images that don't need transparency, pings for anything that needs transparency. And we'll go over how to save files in another video as well, but these are just kind of our starters. So what I'm going to do so I can get going is I'm going to open up my HTML5 templates. And I've got that. I'll move that down here so I have it on my desktop for next time. And I'm going to rename this file that got spit out from my zip. I'm going to call this meowfest and just call it that. And I'm going to open up my folder. And remember from last time, we have our index, we have our style sheet that are kind of blanks. They're kind of ready to go. They got my resets in there for old browsers and stuff like that, but nothing really major going on as far as content. And then I got my images folder that have no images in there. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move all of these resources, these pings, and this JPEG over into my images folder. I'm just going to copy, and I'm holding down my option key so I can copy at the same time. So I don't move them, I'm just copying. I might need them later. And so I've got them all moved into my images folder in my site. Notice that I'm not moving my AI folder into my Meowfest folder. That's because I want to keep my working files and my HTML, CSS files and the image files that are actually for the web separate from my working files. The AI has no need or business being in my website folder. So I'm going to close out that files folder, and I'm going to be just working in my Meowfest. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to open up my index and my style, and I'm going to drag that down, drag both of those down into brackets. Brackets may give you like an error, hey, this came off the internet, do you want me to open it? If that's the case, say yes, and you may have to open them up individually. I'm going to actually also increase the size of this so you guys can see a little bit better. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remember that my page title is the little tab on my browser there. I want to make sure that that's changed. So I'm going to call this Meow Fest 2017. And some people, this is a stylistic thing. They like little separators. Some people do the vertical. Some people do the double dash, the dash or double colon. I like the double colon just from a stylistic standpoint. And I say it's home because that's the home page that I'm on. We're going to have a nav. We're going to pretend that this has multiple pages, but we're really only going to build one. But I do want to label it as home there if I can. That helps with SEO, search engine optimization, and it helps with just people knowing where they are. Okay, notice I also have my link to my style sheet, and that's where it is. It lives in my main folder, so there's no folder name / style, it's just style. So that's opening up. It's going into my JS folder, and open up Modernizer. The other thing that we didn't talk about last time is this little line right here. This is called meta name viewport content with device or device width initial scale 1. What that means is that we are making a responsive website, or at least in this stage, in this practice, a flexible website, or just a flexible website. And so what this is telling the browser is don't scale it yourself. I'll tell you what size to be. I'll tell you what scale to be. If you didn't have this line, it would take your site and just kind of squish it down, and it wouldn't listen to your sizes, your widths of your divs and things like that. It would just take your whole site and squeeze it down like it was a old school desktop site that you're just looking at on a phone. So this is the first part of being responsive. It allows for flexibility in your widths and flexibility in your site. So that's a really important line to have. So if you're working off of maybe an old version of this from another practice, from another school, or from another class or something like that, and you don't have this line in there, it could cause some problems. So make sure you're using mine. All right, so the first thing that we got to do is we really need to create, pretty much everybody calls it a wrapper. And that's kind of like our container for our entire website. And I'm going to start talking about kind of divs and our website containers. It's kind of like I use an analogy of a moving van. So let's say you're moving out of your house. You have a van that you put all of your stuff in. This is going to be, your wrapper is kind of like the moving van. All of your stuff is going to go inside of here. So we're going to create a div that's a wrapper. And this is not, it's not an article, it's not anything, it's just kind of a generic div. This is kind of one of those opportunities for a generic div. And we're going to give this a generic div, we're going to give this a class. So a class is a way of styling something or styling an item. You can put a class, and we're going to call this class of wrapper, on anything, any element you want. So you can put a class on a div, any kind of div, articles, navs, things like that. You can put a class on those. You can put a class on images. You can put a class on paragraphs, on H's. Anything that you want to talk to very specifically, you can put a class on. You don't have to put a class on everything. So you can talk to tags specifically, and we're going to do a little bit of both in this demo, where we talk to, sometimes we'll talk to tags specifically because it's the only one, it's going to be the only tag in there, or there might be multiple tags that we need to put classes on. But as Beyonce says, if you want to style it, put a class on it. So we'll start with that. All right, so we're going to make a wrapper, and this is going to be kind of our entire site. So I've kind of hit return and put the close on there. Make sure you close everything that you start. And I'm going to go to my style, and I'm going to take a look at my style. And so all of this stuff, if you remember from last time, was the Myers reset. This is stuff for old browsers. You can kind of ignore it. What you need is this stuff from, don't get confused about it too much. And then this HTML, it's setting my font size at 12. Okay, which we'll come back to in a minute. All right, so let's start our wrapper. So go back. We made a div with a class of wrapper. We need to talk to that class. So how you talk to a class is period plus the word. Okay. So, all right, so I need to give this some dimensions. And the first thing that I do is I always give it a position. And you'll see that I've got a couple of different types of position. We're going to have another video that really goes into straight into positioning a little bit later, but we're all going to use static for our position for most of this website. So what static means is that the divs just go one right after each other. They push each other out of the way. They go right in the order that you code them in. They don't overlap each other, nothing. They just kind of go like stack on top of each other, like boxes stacked on top of boxes. So we're going to stick with position static so far, and we'll talk about the other ones as another exercise, actually. Okay, now we got to give it a width. So I'm going to give it a width, and I want this thing to go 100% wide of the size of my site. You can tell that my navigation is going 100% of the size of my site. My photos going 100% of the size of my site. So it needs to just go 100% edge to edge. But I don't want this thing to grow forever. What if it gets on a like gigantic screen that goes out to like 3,000 pixels wide. I don't want everything to go off into space. I want to constrain it at some point. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give this a max width of 1200 pixels. And 1200 is kind of an arbitrary size, but 1200 is kind of the average of most people's laptops or desktops. Then so we can see it, I'm just going to give you I'm going to add the background color of red, and I'm going to give it, I'm not going to put anything else. I'm just going to do red, and then I'm going to put I'm just going to put some gobbledygook in there so we can kind of see it. I'm going to save both my index and my style so we can kind of see what's going on with my site. So I'm going to open up in Chrome. Okay, so I can see that it's going 100% and it stops at 1200. If I kind of crank down, you can see if I'm going for phone, it kind of goes the width of my phone size, and it keeps on growing and growing and growing until it finally stops at 1200, even though my window's all the way out here. So 1200 is right here. So let's say I want to center my website. A lot of times you want to center the website if it grows to beyond that max width. If your window grows beyond that max width, I can just center it. The easiest way to center things is to do margin right auto, margin left auto. And if I refresh, you can see that my site is centered now as the window grows larger, and then if it's smaller, it just goes 100% wide. Now, if you're understanding this part and you want to do the shorthand version, you can actually do the shorthand, which is margin 0 space auto. And what that means is 0 top and bottom margin, auto left and right margin. And that just is a shorthand version of margin left auto, margin right auto. If you don't understand the shorthand just yet, we'll talk about it a little bit later. Just use margin left auto, margin right auto. It's the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to delete that color. And we're going to go to our next step, which is we need to build our header. So this is going to be our header. And we're going to have a nav div for our button and a nav div and a div for our logo inside of this header. That may be a little over engineering, but if you have a much more complicated header than I do in this example, just get into the habit of it. So we're going to make a header, and we're going to make a nav div, and we're going to make a div for my logo. And this logo is not highly styled. It's just Verdana, so it could have been text, but we're going to pretend that it's more of a stylistic logo, which is going to be more realistic for you guys. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to build that. So I know that my size of my div is 100% wide, and I've got these two divs in there with my image and my two images in there. So I'm just going to throw that in there. I'm just going to rough that in. I'm going to worry about my sizing a little bit later. So some of you guys like to do it all at once. Some of you guys like to do it, do all your HTML at once and then style. Some people like to do one thing at a time. It's just up to you how you want to do it. I'm just going to kind of rough this in just a little bit. I'm going to do it one at a time. It seems like people like that. So I'm going to make a header. Now I'm not going to give header a class because this is the only header I'm going to have. I'm probably going to have another generic div in here somewhere, so that's why I gave the div a class. The header, I only have one header, so I don't have to worry about it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to save that. I'm going to style my header. So my header, notice that it doesn't have a dot in front of the word header because it's not a class of header, it's just the tag header. So I'm going to give that I'm going to give it the same treatment or a similar treatment to the wrapper. I'm going to give it a position of static, and that's because I want I want this thing to be inside my wrapper, but then everything underneath, it just goes underneath it. I want it to push things out of the way. I'm going to give it a width of 100%. Now I don't have to give it a max width because it's inside my wrapper and my wrapper is controlling that part of it, so I don't have to give it a max width. I also don't need to center it because it's going 100%, not a big deal. I do want to colorize it, so I'm going to give it a background dash color, and I'm going to grab my color from my Illustrator file. I'm going to hide these guides and units so I can get the exact color from my file. I'm going to grab that from my hex code down here from Illustrator or Photoshop, same place. And I need to put that pound sign in there to give it a background color. And I'm going to save it. Now, I'm not going to see that. If I go back to my Google Chrome, I'm not going to see anything because there's no content in there, so there's no height, so I'm not going to see anything. In fact, I do not want to put heights in any of my items. Heights generally get you in trouble. There are some exceptions to that rule, but because your site is flexible and it's going to be going on different sizes of phones, different sizes of screens, your type may rewrap, your images are sizing up and sizing down. You really can't depend on height that much. So I'm just going to kind of leave that alone. I'm not going to put a height in there. But what I am going to do is I'm going to start putting my images and my divs in my header. So again, I'm going to hit return. And then I'm going to tab in my header here, and I'm going to actually make my other items. I'm going to put my hamburger in. So I'm going to make a nav, because it's kind of a navigation element. We're going to have that main nav that pops down, but this is also a nav element. Since I'm going to have two navs, I'm going to have this button that's a nav element, and then the actual navigation that shows up that's a nav element. I am going to use classes. So I'm going to give this a class of burger. I guess it'd be appropriate cheeseburger or something like that. I'm going to close my nav, and then I'm going to put the image of the burger icon inside my burger menu. So I'm going to do that by, we didn't do an image in the last exercise, but we're going to put an image in now. So the way I do that is img space src equals quotes. Now, it's the burger we put in the images folder, so I have to tell it what folder it's in. So images slash, and it's kind of helping me out, brackets is kind of helping me out, burger.ping. Okay, I've got to have my quotes around it. And then I need to give this an alt tag, and an alt tag is a description in English for both search engines, so like Google, and blind folks, people who have screen readers that when they mouse over, they need to tell what this image is. So we're going to say this main menu button is what we're going to call that. And then we have to close our image. I'm going to turn off my word wrap here. I don't like working with word wrap. I need to close my image because in HTML, everything, remember, has to have an open and a close. But you don't put an image around anything, it just is. So the way you close those types of things is space, slash, and then bracket. And that is how you do your image. So you start with the bracket, img space, src equals. Be sure some people put scr, and if your image isn't showing up, then that's why. src, images burger.ping, alt, main menu button. I'm going to save that, and I'm just going to take a look back in my browser in my Chrome, hit return, and you'll see that I actually have that in there. So I'm in good shape. It doesn't have any space around it. It may be the wrong size right now. We don't know, or I mean, we do know because we can go back to our Illustrator file. But I'm not worried about that just yet. I'm going to style that in a minute. Also in my header, I need to put my logo. And there's not really a great div style or a type of div to put a logo in. There's no like logo tag, for instance. So I'm just going to use a generic div in this case, class equals logo. And I'm going to put the second image in there. In other words, image src equals images slash logo alt equals meowfest 2017 logo in my quotes, space, and slash in my image. I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to take a look at that. And you'll see that they're two side by side, or I'm sorry, underneath each other. That's because these divs, they go underneath each other naturally. We actually want them to go side by side and be specific sizes and have some margins and some spacing around it. So that's what we're going to do next, is actually style those divs. We didn't actually style anything yet for burger or logo. We styled header, but not these two. So let's start with burger and style those.